I choose you today to be my partner and my best friend.
Safe with you.
Safe with you.
The security guard at the front desk of Reign Tower stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. "Mrs. Reign," he said, and the way he said it, like her name was something he'd rehearsed, made Simone Ellison stop walking. "I'm sorry," she said. "Mr. Reign said if you came by, we're to send you straight up." 42nd floor. He was already pressing the elevator call button for her, already smiling too wide, already treating her like she was made of something breakable and expensive. Simone looked down at herself. Scrubs, sneakers with a coffee stain on the left toe. She'd come from a 12-hour shift, changing bedpans, and calming down a man with dementia who kept forgetting his own daughter's face. She had not come to this glass building on Peachtree with the intention of being called Mrs. Reign by a man in a security uniform who looked at her like she was royalty in the wrong clothes. "There's been a mistake," she said. "I'm just picking up my husband." The guard's smile flickered, confused now, like she'd said something in a language he almost understood. "Ma'am, Mr. Xavier Reign is the founder. He's expecting you." The elevator doors opened. Simone did not remember deciding to walk into it. 6 weeks. She'd been married to Xavier for 6 weeks, and in that time she had learned exactly one lie he'd told her, and it happened to be the size of a skyscraper. The elevator climbed. 42 floors of glass sliding past outside a window she was too nervous to look through. When the doors opened, she was standing in a lobby with floor-to-ceiling windows and a wall of photographs. Groundbreakings, ribbon cuttings, magazine covers, and in the center of that wall, larger than the rest, a portrait of a man in a wheelchair, chin lifted, eyes steady, wearing a suit that had clearly never touched a discount rack. Underneath it, in brushed steel letters, Xavier Reign, founder and CEO, her husband. Before you find out how she got here, and what she said to him the second he stepped out of that office, you should know how this whole thing started. Because 6 months before Simone Ellison stood in that lobby feeling like the floor had been pulled out from under her, her own family sat around a folding table in her mother's backyard and laughed at her for saying yes to him. Rewind 5 months. The Ellison family didn't do quiet disapproval. They did it loud, at cookouts, with a plate of ribs in one hand and an opinion in the other. A wheelchair Simone. That was her sister Angela, Angie, to everybody who'd known her longer than a week, standing by the grill with a red cup sweating in her hand. You couldn't find you a man that could at least stand up at his own wedding? "He can stand," Simone said. "With braces, for short periods. It's not." "I'm not talking about braces. I'm talking about providing," Angie said. And a few cousins at the table laughed, that low, ugly laugh that people do when they think they're being funny instead of cruel. "You a home health aide making what, $32,000 a year, and you bringing home a man who needs help getting dressed? Baby, who's going to take care of who?" "He has a job," Simone said. "What job?" "Logistics. Consulting. He works with his laptop mostly." Angie made a sound in her throat, half laugh, half something meaner. "Consulting, Simone. Every broke man in Atlanta calls himself a consultant." Simone's mother, Pauline, hadn't said much, which from Pauline was its own kind of statement. She was sitting in a lawn chair with her ankles crossed, watching her daughter the way she used to watch weather reports before a storm, waiting to see how bad it was going to get. "I like him fine," Pauline finally said. "He's polite. He looks you in the eye. But baby, I raised you to think about your future. You're 31 years old. You've got maybe one more good decade to build something before your body starts telling you no. And you want to spend it pushing a man around? I don't push him around, Mama. He has a chair. He moves it himself. You know what I mean." Simone did know what she meant. That was the part that stung. Her cousin Keisha, who'd always been the one person in the family who kept her mouth shut when it mattered, leaned over and murmured, "Don't listen to them. If he's good to you, that's what matters."
"He is good to me,"
Simone said, louder than she meant to, loud enough that the whole table quieted for a second. "He remembers things. He asks how my day was and actually waits for the answer. He doesn't talk over me. Do you know how rare that is? Rare don't pay rent," Angie said. And that was the moment Derek decided to walk over from the drink cooler, because of course he did. Derek Voss, Simone's on and off situationship from 3 years back, the one who'd ghosted her for 2 months and come back like nothing happened. The one Angie still invited to family functions because he's basically family at this point, which was a sentence that told you everything about Angie's judgment. "I heard you got engaged," Derek said, setting a beer down on the table like he owned real estate on it. "To the wheelchair dude. His name is Xavier. My bad. Xavier." He said the name like it tasted bad in his mouth. "Look, I'm happy for you. For real. I always figured you for somebody who wanted, a whole life, trips, a man who could carry the furniture in when y'all move, somebody who could chase the kids around the yard. People in wheelchairs have kids, Derek. People in wheelchairs chase kids around yards. You've seen a Paralympics before, right? I'm just saying." He put his hands up, all innocence, the way men do right before they say the least innocent thing in the room. "You settling. That's all I'm saying. And it's your life. But don't come crying to none of us when you 38, pushing a wheelchair up a ramp at the grocery store, wondering what happened to your 20s. Simone stood up so fast her chair scraped against the concrete patio. "You want to know what happened to my 20s, Derek? I spent them waiting on you to text back. That's what happened to my 20s. The table went dead silent, then erupted into the kind of laughter that was almost worse than the insult, the kind where everybody's laughing at the situation, not with anybody, and Simone was standing there in the middle of it feeling 14 years old again, feeling like the funny cousin, the one whose choices were entertainment for everyone else's Saturday afternoon. She grabbed her purse off the back of the chair. "I'm leaving." "Simone," her mother started. "No, it's fine. Y'all enjoy the ribs." She met Xavier in his car, the modified one with the hand controls, parked 2 blocks down, because her mother's street didn't have curb cuts, and he refused to make her walk further than necessary to get to him. He took one look at her face and didn't ask what happened. He just reached over, unlocked her door from the inside even though it wasn't locked, a small gesture that had become their thing. "I opened the door before you had to ask." "Bad one?" he said. Derek showed up. "Ah." Xavier nodded slowly, like that one word explained a war. "The ex who ghosted you and came back around like a stray cat. That's him." "What did he say?" Simone almost didn't tell him, but that wasn't how they did things. 6 months in, and they'd already built a habit of not swallowing things whole, not letting things calcify into resentment, the way she'd watched her parents do for 30 years before the divorce. "He said I was settling, that I'd wake up at 38 pushing you up a ramp at the grocery store, wondering where my 20s went." Xavier was quiet for a second. Then he laughed. Not a bitter laugh, an actual laugh, low and real. "What's funny?" "Nothing. Everything." He shook his head. "You know how many people have decided who I am before they've had a full conversation with me? I stopped counting around year 6. People see the chair and their brain fills in the rest of the sentence before I even open my mouth. Weak, dependent, broke, sad. It's like..." He stopped himself. "Like what?" "Nothing. It's not important." That was the second lie, if you were counting. The first one had been smaller, something about a business trip he called boring just spreadsheets, that had actually involved him closing a $200 million acquisition over a working dinner. Simone didn't know about that one yet either. She just knew her fiancé had a habit, every now and then, of stopping a sentence halfway through and swallowing the second half. She reached over and took his hand off the gear shift. "I don't care what they think," she said. "I care what's true. And what's true is you've never once made me feel small. You've never talked to me like I was slow. You remember I take my coffee with oat milk, not regular, because regular messes with my stomach. And you remembered that after I mentioned it one time, 4 months ago. Derek dated me for 2 years and still brought me a caramel macchiato on my birthday, which I've told him 100 times I hate. That's a low bar though, remembering your coffee order. You'd be surprised how many men can't clear it." He smiled at that, the real smile, the one that showed the small gap between his front teeth that she'd fallen for before she even understood why. "Marry me anyway," he said. "Even with the folding chair and the used Honda and the family that thinks you're settling, the Honda's not used, it's a hand-me-down. There's a difference. Marry me anyway, Simone. I already said yes once. You want me to say it in the car too? I want you to say it every day for the rest of my life, if I'm honest. She should have asked him then. Something in her chest flickered. A small, quiet suspicion. The kind you get when someone's kindness feels almost too specific, too practiced, like it had been built by somebody who'd learned the hard way what love was supposed to look like and was now deliberately, carefully, offering her all of it. But suspicion felt like an insult to something that good, so she let it go. She kissed him instead, right there in a used, hand-me-down Honda, parked 2 blocks from her mother's house, with her family's laughter still ringing somewhere behind her. The wedding, 3 months later, was small. Xavier had insisted on small, said he didn't want a circus, said he wanted the day to be about them and not about seating charts and open bars for people who'd forget the toast by Tuesday. Simone had agreed, mostly because her family's excitement for the event was lukewarm at best, and there was something almost merciful about not having 200 witnesses to that particular flavor of lukewarm. 40 guests, a community hall in East Point with string lights and folding chairs, a caterer who did soul food the right way, a DJ who was Xavier's college roommate and who kept sneaking in old-school slow jams between the upbeat stuff. Xavier's side of the guest list was strange, in retrospect, a handful of people who all seemed to defer to him in a way that didn't match consultant. A tall man named Terrence who never left Xavier's side for more than 10 minutes and who kept getting texts he'd glance at and then silence without responding. A woman in her 60s, sharply dressed, who Xavier introduced simply as Ruth, family friend, and who cried harder at the vows than Xavier's own mother did. Simone's side of the guest list showed up mostly out of obligation. Angie wore black, which she claimed afterward was just what I had clean, and spent the reception at a table in the back with her arms crossed, occasionally leaning over to whisper something to Keisha that made Keisha's face go tight and apologetic. Pauline gave a toast. It was polite. It was also, if you listened closely, a masterclass in saying something and its opposite in the same sentence. Simone has always followed her heart, Pauline said, holding her glass up, smiling the smile she used for church and funerals. Even when the rest of us couldn't quite see where it was leading her, I truly hope, that this works out the way she believes it will. That's not a toast, that's a warning with a bow on it, Xavier murmured to Simone under the applause, and she had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing at her own wedding. Derek had not been invited. He came anyway, as Angie's +1, which was either an accident or a small act of cruelty dressed up as forgetfulness. With Angie, it was genuinely hard to tell the difference. He found Simone near the dessert table during the reception, a little too much bourbon working behind his eyes. "Congratulations," he said, and the word came out sideways, like it had been dragged through something first. "Thank you for coming, I guess." "I mean it. I do." He glanced over at Xavier, who was across the room, laughing at something Terrence had said, his chair angled easily into the circle of guests, like he'd been born knowing how to hold a room. "He seems like a good dude. I'm not saying he's not a good dude. But you're gonna be doing a lot of the heavy lifting in this marriage, Simone. Literally, and you know what I mean. And I just hope you thought that through, because once the wedding day glow wears off, that's a whole life of appointments and accessible this and accessible that, and I hope it's worth it to you." Simone set her plate down. "Derek, I need you to hear this clearly, because I'm only going to say it once at my own wedding. You dated me for 2 years and never once asked what I wanted for my birthday. You called my job wiping old people at a 4th of July cookout in front of my whole family. You disappeared for 2 months without a word and came back expecting a parade. And you're standing here at my reception, lecturing me about heavy lifting? I'm just being honest. You're being bitter. There's a difference, and it's the same difference between remembering somebody's coffee order and forgetting their whole birthday." She picked her plate back up. "Enjoy the cake. It's red velvet. I picked it myself because my husband asked me what my favorite was and then didn't argue about it." She walked away before he could answer, and if her hands were shaking a little, it was mostly out of the satisfaction of finally saying it. 6 years too late, but somehow exactly on time. If you've made it this far, you already know this story's got more turns coming, So go ahead and hit that subscribe button now, because part 2 is where everything Simone thought she knew gets turned upside down, and you don't want to miss it. The thing about Xavier's phone was that it never stopped. Not in an anxious way, in an efficient way, like a man who'd learned to answer 40 emails between courses of dinner without ever making the person across from him feel like an afterthought. Simone had noticed it in the first month of dating and assumed, reasonably, that a consultant's life involved a lot of client emergencies. At the reception, an hour before they were supposed to cut the cake, Terence approached Xavier and said something low, urgent, close to his ear. Simone watched her new husband's face change. Not panic exactly, but a kind of focused stillness she recognized from watching nurses receive bad labs on a night shift. The face of somebody recalculating in real time. "I have to make a call," Xavier told her. 5 minutes, I promise. During our own reception, Simone, he took both her hands. 5 minutes. I would not leave this room for anything smaller than what just walked through that door. He wheeled himself out through the side exit with Terence beside him, and Simone stood there in her wedding dress in the middle of the dance floor, watching the door swing shut, feeling something cold slide down the back of her neck that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Angie appeared at her elbow within 30 seconds, because Angie had a radar for exactly this kind of moment. "Everything good?" Angie asked, in a tone that made it clear she already suspected it wasn't. He had to take a call. "On your wedding day." "It's fine, Angie. I'm just saying, my cousin's husband left his own baby shower to argue with his bookie on the phone. I've seen this movie before, Simone. Men who disappear at the exact moment they're supposed to be present. He's not your cousin's husband." "No," Angie said. "He's better dressed, which honestly makes it worse, because at least the bookie guy was upfront about being trash." Simone walked away from her before she said something she'd regret in the wedding photos. Xavier came back 9 minutes later. Not 5, 9, and she'd counted every one of them, his jaw a little tight, his smile back in place a half-second too late to be fully convincing. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Everything's fine. Work thing, handled." "What kind of work thing needs handling on a Saturday during your own wedding?" "The kind that doesn't wait for calendars," he said, and kissed her knuckles, and steered the conversation toward the cake, and she let him, because it was her wedding day, and she didn't want to spend it interrogating a man who'd just spent the last 3 months being the gentlest person who'd ever loved her. But later that night, packing up gifts, folding the little card table where the guest book had sat, she found a phone, not hers, not Xavier's personal one, a second phone, black, sleek, buzzing quietly in the pocket of the jacket he'd draped over the back of a chair. The screen lit up with a name she didn't recognize. Incoming call. R. Okonkwo. Board chair. Board chair. Board chair of what? She didn't answer it. She put it back exactly where she found it, and she told herself it was nothing. A client's company maybe, a non-profit he volunteered with. Any of 100 boring explanations. She told herself that all the way home, and for most of the 6 weeks that followed, right up until the afternoon, she stood in a lobby on the 42nd floor of a building with her husband's name in steel letters on the wall, being called Mrs. Reign by a man who was clearly terrified of disappointing his boss. Xavier's office door was glass, frosted at the bottom, clear at the top, and through it Simone could see him before he saw her. On a call, 3 screens behind him, a man in a suit, adjusting numbers on a slide, while Xavier spoke with the particular calm of somebody used to being the smartest person on a call and not needing to prove it. She didn't wait for an assistant to announce her. She pushed the door open. Xavier looked up, and for exactly 1 second she would replay for weeks afterward, his face did something complicated. Not guilt, not quite. Something closer to relief mixed with dread, like a man who'd been carrying a secret so long that having it finally seen felt almost like putting down a bag of bricks, even as the bricks landed on somebody he loved. "I'll call you back," he said into the headset, and ended the call without waiting for a response. "Simone, founder and CEO," she said. She wasn't shouting. Her voice was very quiet, which was somehow worse. "There's a portrait of you in the lobby, Xavier. Larger than life. Founder and CEO of Reign Holdings. Simone, let me. I introduced you to my mother as a consultant. Do you understand that? I stood in my mother's kitchen and told her my husband does consulting work, because that's what you told me, and my mother, who has been waiting for a reason to feel superior to me since I was 19 years old, looked at me like I was a fool who'd married a fool. And the whole time, you owned the building she'd have to drive past to get to her dialysis appointments. It wasn't a lie built to hurt you. I don't care what it was built for. I care that it's a lie. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated that it cracked. Hated giving him that much. You let me sit in that backyard and get laughed at for marrying a broke man in a wheelchair. You let Derek call me pathetic to my face at our own wedding. You let my whole family think I was throwing my life away on somebody who couldn't provide, when you could probably buy that backyard, Xavier. You could probably buy the house behind it. I didn't let anything happen. I didn't know what your family was saying to you until you told me, in the car, crying. But you knew this. She gestured at the office, the glass. The city spread out gold and glittering behind him through the window. The whole time. You knew, and you let me defend you to people using half the truth. Because the half you gave me made you sound smaller than you are, and I never once thought to ask why a man would rather be underestimated than known. Xavier was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its boardroom calm. Because being underestimated was the first honest thing anybody ever gave me, Simone. What is that supposed to mean? You want the whole story? Fine. Sit down. I don't want to sit down. Then stand. I don't care. But you're going to hear it before you walk out that door and decide I'm just another man who lied to you. She crossed her arms and stayed standing, but she stayed. I built this company from a garage when I was 26, Xavier said. Before the accident. I could walk then. I could run. I ran track in college. Did you know that? No, you didn't, because I don't talk about it. Because for 4 years after the accident, I couldn't stand to think about it. Car accident, my sophomore year running the company. A drunk driver on I-285. I woke up in a hospital bed and the first thing my business partner said to me, not "Are you okay?" Not "Thank God you're alive." He said, "What happens to our Series B now?" Like my legs were a line item. Simone said nothing, but her arms uncrossed a little. The investors wanted me out within a year. Quietly. Politely. Optics, they called it. A CEO in a wheelchair doesn't inspire confidence, apparently. I fought for the company and I won, and I learned something in that fight that I've never forgotten. The second people know what you're worth, they stop seeing you and start seeing the number. Every woman I dated after that, and there were a few, found out who I was before they found out who I am, and it poisoned everything. I couldn't tell if they liked my laugh or my net worth. I couldn't tell if they were patient with the chair because they loved me, or because they'd read a profile of me in Forbes and decided patience was a good long-term investment. So you tested me. I didn't test you, I let you meet me first. The real me. The man who forgets to eat lunch when he's deep in a spreadsheet. The man who cries at his godmother's gospel records. The man who needed 4 months of physical therapy just to learn to transfer from the chair to a car seat without help. And who remembers your coffee order because I pay attention to the people I love, not because I have an assistant tell me to. I let you fall for that man before the company had a chance to get in the way. And when were you going to tell me? After the honeymoon? After the kids? On my deathbed? Today. Actually, tonight. I was going to tell you tonight. He rubbed a hand over his face. The board called an emergency session this morning. Regulatory filing deadline moved up. There's a merger closing that's been 18 months in the making, and I had exactly 1 day to decide whether to bring you into the building before the story broke publicly, because it was going to break publicly within the week either way, and I did not want you finding out from a headline instead of from me. I found out from a security guard calling me Mrs. Reign like I was supposed to already know. That's fair. That part I didn't plan well. Simone sat down then, not because she'd forgiven him, but because her legs needed the chair more than her pride needed to keep standing. You should have told me before the wedding, she said quietly. Not because of the money, Xavier. I don't care about the money. I care that I stood up in front of 40 people and made a promise to know you, and it turns out there was a whole tower of a person I hadn't met yet. I know. My family laughed at me. And the worst part isn't even that they were wrong about you being poor. The worst part is that everything they said, that I was settling for less, that I wasn't thinking about my future, that I was making a foolish choice, none of it was ever about the money. It was about the chair. They looked at a man in a wheelchair and decided he had less to offer, and I spent 5 months defending you against that ugliness, and this whole time you had the receipts to shut them up in your back pocket, and you never gave them to me. Would you have wanted me to? Xavier asked. Would you have wanted to win that argument with a bank statement instead of with the truth of who I am? Simone opened her mouth to answer, and then closed it again, because she genuinely didn't know. If this story's got you some kind of way right now, and I know it does, do me a favor and hit subscribe before you keep reading, because what happens when Simone's family finds out is a whole different level of messy. The story broke on a Wednesday. Not a headline exactly. A business journal ran a piece about the merger, mentioned Xavier Reign's recent marriage in passing, and somebody's cousin's co-worker saw it and sent it into the family group chat with 17 exclamation points and no context. Angie called Simone 40 minutes later. Girl, is this real? Is your husband the Xavier Reign? Like the $10 billion Xavier Reign? It's real. Simone! Angie's voice went up 2 octaves, into a register Simone had genuinely never heard her sister use, not even at her own wedding. Why didn't you tell us? The wedding could have been. Girl, do you know we could have had it catered by somebody with a Michelin star? Do you know Mama's been telling everybody at church you married beneath your options? I heard what Mama's been telling everybody, Angie. I was sitting at the table when she said it to my face. Well, I mean, that was before we knew. That's the part I need you to sit with, Simone said, and her voice was steady now, steadier than it had been in Xavier's office, because this conversation she'd had time to rehearse in her head on the drive home. Not one thing about Xavier changed between the wedding and today. He was exactly as kind, exactly as attentive, exactly as good to me the day you called me a fool for marrying him, as he is today, now that you know what his bank account looks like. The only thing that changed is what you found out, which means everything you said to me, about settling, about my future, about pushing a wheelchair up a ramp for the rest of my life, none of that was ever really about him. It was about what you assumed a man in a wheelchair couldn't be. And I need you to think real hard about what that says, Angie, because it's not a good look, and money doesn't fix that. Money just made you quiet about it. There was a long silence on the line. That's not fair, Angie finally said, but there wasn't much fight behind it. It's completely fair. I'm not asking you to apologize for the money thing. I'm asking you to apologize for the ableism, Angie, because that's what it was, dressed up as concern for my future. I hear you, Angie said, quiet now. I do. I need to think on that. It wasn't an apology, but it was more honest than anything Angie had said to her in 5 months, and Simone decided, for tonight, that would have to be enough. Her mother's call came an hour later, and Pauline, to her credit, didn't lead with congratulations. I said some things at that cookout I need to answer for, Pauline said, no preamble, which from her mother was as close to vulnerability as Simone had ever witnessed. I looked at that man and I saw a wheelchair before I saw a person, and I let that color everything I said to you about your future, and I raised you better than the way I acted that day, and I'm sorry. Simone had to sit down on the edge of her bed. Thank you, Mama. I'm not sorry because he turned out to have money, baby. I want you to hear that difference. I'm sorry because I judged a man's worth by what his body could do instead of who he was, and that's an old, ugly way of thinking that I picked up somewhere and never put down, and you deserve better than that from your own mother. I do, Simone said, but I appreciate you saying it. Derek did not call. Derek sent a text 3 days later that read, in full, Hey, saw the news. That's amazing for you. We should catch up sometime. And Simone looked at it for exactly 4 seconds before deleting the thread entirely. No response, no closure, no satisfaction of an argument won. Some people didn't earn the effort of a comeback. Some people just earned silence, and Simone had learned, somewhere in the last 6 months, the difference between the two. Xavier found her that evening on the balcony of the house. His house, technically. though he'd been quietly transferring half of everything into both their names for weeks before she even knew what he had to give. Looking out at a skyline that suddenly made a lot more sense to her than it had that morning. "You still mad at me?" he asked, wheeling out beside her. "Working on it," Simone said. "I'm mad you lied. I'm not mad about the money, but I need you to understand those are two different things, and I need you to never conflate them, because if you ever explain away a lie by pointing at your bank account again, we are going to have a much bigger problem than this one." "Understood. And I want honesty going forward. All of it. The boring board calls, the emergency mergers, the second phone, all of it. I didn't marry the CEO. I married the man who cries at gospel records. I need you to let me keep marrying that man, out loud, every single day, and not some polished version of him that shows up for photographs." "Deal." He reached over and took her hand. The same gesture from the car 6 months ago, the same door unlocked before she had to ask. "For what it's worth, and I know that's a loaded phrase to use with you right now, so bear with me. None of this changes what I said in that car. You never once made me feel like the chair was the whole story. You argued with your own family for 5 months to defend a version of me that had nothing to do with what I owned. That's not something money buys, Simone. That's something you did on your own, and I don't think you fully understand yet how rare that actually is." Simone looked out at the city. His city, in a sense, or at least a chunk of its skyline. Buildings he'd built from a garage and a busted spine, and a refusal to let either one define the ceiling of what he could become. "I'm not going to pretend the money doesn't matter at all," she said finally. "It matters. It changes things, but it's not why I married you, and it's not going to be why I stay." "Then why are you staying?" She thought about the cookout, the folding chairs, the red cups sweating in the Georgia heat, her sister's laughter, Derek's bourbon breath, her mother's careful cutting toast. She thought about all the versions of her family who had looked at a man's body and decided, without asking a single real question, exactly how much he had to offer the world. "Because you were the first person who ever let me finish a sentence," she said. Wheelchair or throne, that was never going to change my answer. They just never bothered to ask. Below them, the city kept moving, indifferent to all of it. The lies, the laughter, the slow, unglamorous work of two people deciding, again, on purpose, to actually know each other. Xavier didn't say anything else. He just reached over and turned off the second phone, the black one, the one with the board chair's name on the screen, and set it face down on the table between them. And for the rest of that night, at least, nobody in that house was anybody's CEO.